Indiana Disability History Project, Indiana Institute on Disability and Community, Indiana University.
The shift to supported employment. Roberta Stafford.
I worked as a vocational rehabilitation counselor for about 23 and a half years for the state of Indiana, 10 years in Indianapolis, and the last so many years, let's see, what would that be, 13? 10 years and then 13 and a half in Bloomington, Indiana, and then the last 6 years I worked as a supervisor, area supervisor in Bloomington. Well, vocational rehabilitation is a state and federally funded agency that works with people with disabilities in order to, for some people, to get them into the workforce initially, or for other people, they maybe have already been in the workforce, but they've had some kind of accident or an illness or whatever, where they can't just go back and do the kinds of work they've done before, and they're going to need some kind of assistance to be able to return to work. And so we work with people with disabilities to help them to figure out what kinds of jobs, with career counseling, to help them figure out what kinds of jobs they may be able to do now, what they're interested in, because they're the person driving the process. So, you know, we're not going to, back in history of VR, counselors, you went to a counselor and they told you what career. This is, okay, you have this disability, here's the kind of job you can have. But that was back in the beginning, and we've learned a lot more about empowering the individual and what's going to work, you know, and one disability, you know, person can have the same disability and have totally different skills and, you know, barriers, so it's all individualized. When I started, we were working primarily with people, well, we worked with a lot of people with intellectual disabilities and developmental disabilities. And at that time, most all those people were in workshops, or they were transitioning out of high school and going into workshops. And that was pretty much the goal for everybody. So we would get referrals from the workshops usually, and we would meet with the individuals to determine their eligibility. Then they would typically go through what was called a work evaluation, where they'd see which, you know, pieces of, you know, hardware, sorting them to see how fast they went, and you know all this kind of stuff. And then if they needed some help doing it faster or doing it better quality or whatever, they would go through a work adjustment period. But at the end of that, they would end up working in the workshop. So we weren't talking about preparing people for community jobs. So that changed not too many years after I started, because I started in '85, because we had Connie Farrell and some people come in and talk to the counselors about this new program called Support Employment. And I can tell you that at that time, we were very skeptical. I can remember coming out of that meeting where we heard all of this and going, what? This is not going to work. Because we did not have that experience. We had the experience of this is what happens, and these, you know, this population has too many barriers, and they're not going to be able to work in the community. And so we approached it very, you know, we weren't sure this was going to work out. In the past, pretty much before supported employment, sheltered workshop was the successful closure primarily. I mean, if you had people who came in with disabilities other than intellectual disabilities or developmental disabilities, then of course those other people would go into the community, and those were successful closures. But working in a workshop was considered a successful closure for people who had intellectual disabilities. And but that all changed with supported employment, where the goal became more community employment, and then because that was available to people, they eliminated the using that as a successful closure. And that's, you know, probably, I don't know, in the 90s or sometime after support employment came into play.
Music, Redwood Trail. Produced by Indiana Institute on Disability and Community, Center for Health Equity. Funded in part by the Indiana Governor's Council for People with Disabilities.
Copyright 2020, the Trustees of Indiana University.